Well, good morning. It's great to be here. And as I look around, I certainly see a lot of familiar faces. And so it's always great to come back and be with you and share some things that I hope will be helpful as you go through this week with the Texas Jail Association. And I can tell you that if 15 years ago someone had asked me if I would be speaking to the Texas Jail Association and actually knew what I was talking about, I'd say, "You're crazy." And now I are one. You can laugh at that. So when it was suggested that I run for sheriff back in 2011, I told my friend, "What? I've never been in law enforcement." But then he went on to say, 40% of the county's employees work for the sheriff's office. 40% of the operational budget of the county comes to the sheriff's office. So in real numbers, that meant 2,000 employees and a $200 million budget. And that's all I'd done throughout my career, was manage big budgets and lead large organizations. And by Texas law, I would have 10 deputy chiefs who were deeply experienced in law enforcement and jail operations. So by the time I was elected, I knew the most important team member after the chief deputy was the jail administrator. And I did a nationwide search, had 72 applicants, whittled it down to 14, and then ended up with the last 3, and I hired Raul Benasco, now serving as the jail administrator for the Travis County Sheriff's Office, and I know he's doing a great job for you, Sally. And it's the best choice that I could have ever made, and wow, did that decision pay off. I was able to build a great team, and with all the right credentials and experience. In fact, even after almost 10 years since I left that position, our team still sticks together and stays connected. My point is, it takes teamwork to achieve success. And I hope each of you are taking advantage of the training, as well as visiting the exhibits and interacting with the exhibitors who are here. It's not just about your own training with some tools in your toolbox, but also sharing the issues with your folks back home. Now, before I go any further, I want all of you to be thinking of any questions that you may have as I talk about the first part of my presentation, and whether about the role of the United States Marshals Service or about what I present on leadership development, and other issues. The training sessions today and tomorrow, as well as the pre-conference sessions, cover issues common to most law enforcement agencies, not just here in Texas, but nationwide, such as the challenges of leadership, assuring wellness opportunities for our teams, suicide prevention for jailers, and my favorite, what if Chick-fil-A managed your jail? Anybody go to that class yesterday? So this morning, I want to speak to the role that we have in our communities. I also want to emphasize that much of what I will be addressing comes from my experience as a sheriff of one of the largest sheriff's offices in the nation. And first, I'd like to give you some perspective on the various mission sets for the United States Marshals Service. Okay, let's make sure I can do this. There we go. and how they compare to the primary responsibilities of county sheriffs in the state of Texas. So in many ways, you might describe the United States Marshal as a federal sheriff, and similar to what county sheriffs do. And for our purposes, I'm going to focus primarily on fugitive apprehension, judicial security, and court and prisoner operations, though we have a strong role in both asset forfeiture and witness security. So let's talk about fugitive apprehension. You know, the Sheriff's Office provides law enforcement services across the board, including responding to those ubiquitous 911 calls, whereas the Marshals Service has a mandate to focus on apprehending the most violent criminals. Interestingly, it was just 20 years ago when the Department of Justice transferred responsibility for apprehending the most violent criminals to the United States Marshals Service from the FBI. Besides that, I think we do it better anyway. You can laugh. So judicial security. And the sheriff's offices, through your assigned bailiffs, maintain order and provide security for our courtrooms. And in a similar manner, Deputy U.S. Marshals also fill that role. Their larger role is what we call the 1789 mission, assuring judicial security. And the United States Marshal Service is the first and oldest law enforcement agency in the United States, established in 1789 as the law enforcement arm of the federal court system, the federal judicial system. Now, to talk about prisoner operations, and it's the most relevant to our conversation here. Sheriffs run their jails, whereas we partner with counties to house our prisoners either directly or through an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement, for thousands of prisoners in our custody. Approximately 55,000 U.S. Marshal Service wide, and in the Western District of Texas, 5,700 and some odd are in our custody. The Southern District of Texas, headquartered in Houston, is responsible for approximately 5,200. Now, I will tell you that those numbers are down since the beginning of this year, because we don't have the individuals illegally crossing our southern border. And that has changed a lot. And I know that there are a number of counties that have provided the help to us and partnered with us, and we're trying to make sure that we keep those numbers high, because I know when I was in Bexar County, that also was an issue, and I know that one of the county commissioners took that on as special responsibility. And I know that there were millions of dollars that were gained in Bexar County because of that agreement to manage federal prisoners. So we're here today because either you or your agency knows that using business practices and data-driven decisions helps us do our jobs more efficiently. And our business is law enforcement and keeping our communities safe for our citizens. And the profession of corrections is and must evolve to meet the demands of modern corrections while also staying focused on our mission. And that is providing innovative law enforcement and correctional services in a holistic manner through collaborative partnerships. And we have to remain committed to delivering safety, professionalism, and compassion through every aspect of our work. So let me first talk about leadership and leadership development. Leadership and professional development, our role in the profession of corrections and detentions isn't just about locking people up. Leadership and professional development must be a key priority. And when Raul Bonasco became our jail administrator in Bexar County, he brought with him a passion for making sure that staff had every opportunity to learn about leadership and its importance in any role. And in just those 4 years while I served as sheriff, over 100 detention officers and supervisors sought national designations as corrections professionals. And I suspect he's been doing the same in Travis County. And the leadership that is shown from Frances Dembowski and her predecessor in the presidency of TJA are a reflection of that. Not only was their leadership improved, but they also encouraged others to pursue their certifications and education. So often, being in detention was looked on as just the entry point to get to patrol. But as more detention officers earned certifications and program recognition, it also improved their own view of the profession in which they served. I recall one of our sergeants in the Bexar County Jail. She'd been selected to go to patrol, always considered the golden ticket. But she had learned that she could contribute, be recognized, and continue progressing in her profession, being a detention officer, and soon she was selected as a new lieutenant in the detention division. She stayed there because she knew that there was purpose and there was a role for her. So whether through the American Jail Association or the American Correctional Association, there are plenty of avenues to gain certifications and program skills in this profession. And the more you know about your job and the profession of corrections, the better you will be in your job and with your responsibilities for those for whom you're responsible. Remember, this is a profession, not just an entry job. You have responsibility for the lives of those incarcerated in your jail, and that takes a lot of hard work. So make sure you know how to do that job and how to do it well. And often I'm asked about key points or keys to success about leadership and leadership development. And here's how I would characterize my response. There's several of them. First, it's about hard work, attention to detail, and a focus on the mission. It's all about attitude and how you define your environment. And in my view, the only obstacles are those that you impose on yourself. And if there is an obstacle, look for alternative ways to get the job done. Further, on leadership, seek out opportunities for professional development, and those may lead to advancement and promotions. But remember, the focus is on professional development, not just about getting a promotion. It's about doing the job, and the promotions and the advancement will follow. As you progress, be willing to let go and let your subordinates grow and develop. Tell them what needs to be done, not how to do it. Then stand back and watch and smile. So in the same vein, I'm often asked, what advice do I pass on to aspiring leaders? Your number one job is to take care of your people. In the Air Force, we used to say, if you take care of your people, they will take care of the mission. So when I retired from the Air Force, I was asked to join USAA as a vice president. And I was transitioning to a new job and a career for the first time in 32 years. And after only a couple of weeks in the job, I got a call from my boss's executive assistant. And she advised that the president of USAA Property and Casualty Insurance wanted to speak with me on the phone. Not only was he my current boss, but he'd also been my boss when he was a 4-star general. Oops, am I already in trouble? For note, this is advice for those at the supervisory level. So when General Vasilio came on the phone, he had only this to say: your entry into USAA should be like an Olympic diver. Perfectly executed and no ripples. Think about that. And if you've got a question about what that really means, see me afterwards. So another quip to remember: bite off more than you can chew and then chew it. On a more serious note, when you're dealing with people and making decisions that will affect them and others, ask yourself these 4 questions. Is it the right thing to do? Is it legal? Is it moral? And most important, would you like to be treated like this? So when we're faced with making a decision and you're taking a long time to make that decision, remember, a bad decision is better than no decision at all. But when you know it's a bad call, be willing to address it and make change to a more appropriate decision. And there are 3 ways that people get what they want: by planning, by working, and by praying. So to wrap up this focus on leadership and leadership development, if you never ask the question, the answer is always no. Remember, never tried, never failed. Never failed, never learned. And remember, the most important job you'll ever have is the one you're in right now. Because if you're always focused on your next job, you're not paying attention to the job you're in right now. So for the next part of our session, I want to shift to addressing some of the major challenges facing corrections today. So next, everything's not as it seems, and that's about the business of running a sheriff's office. Being the sheriff is not as much about directly enforcing the law, making traffic stops, and locking people up. Where'd the sheriff go? How many sheriffs do we have in here? Whether leading a sheriff's office for a large or a small county, the job also entails having business acumen and having executive skills to run a business, and in some cases, a very large business. It's big business, and it requires skill in developing budgets, using technology to leverage often scarce resources, and personnel resource management. That means resource and budgetary decisions must be data-driven. Likewise, in any jurisdiction, technology is the key. And from looking at the slides on all of the exhibitors that are here, there are a lot of them that are here because they provide technology and capability to your sheriff's offices. Likewise, and today, if we don't use technology and the most cutting-edge technology we can, it's hard to keep up with the criminals. It's no longer the stubby pencil era. So as public servants, we have a responsibility to the taxpayers. And that means running our agencies and organizations using business practices and providing professional development. Regardless of the size of the operation, efficiency, personnel management, and resource allocation may mean the difference between swift or delayed justice. And with our responsibility to taxpayers and to the individuals in our custody, we have the responsibility to assure operational excellence. And that requires, you'll like this, Brian, that requires regular inspections, audits, procedural reviews, assuring we meet or exceed all jail standards. And whether it's coming from the United States Marshals Service Office of Professional Responsibility, Compliance Division, or the Texas Commission on Jail Standards, it's all for the right purpose. Just as budget and program development is important, so also are opportunities for professional development to introduce employees to executive decision-making and strategic planning. There must be a deliberate focus on that professional development to provide the skills that people need over and above their operational experience. It's about best practices. So let me shift gears a bit and raise the issue of those in the criminal justice system who have some level of diagnosed mental illness. On average, 800,000 people with serious mental illnesses are booked into jails annually, and many of the offenses are nonviolent. In fact, I don't recall a conversation I've had about jails and prisons where the subject of mental health hasn't been raised. And in August of 2017, I had the privilege of being the MC for a luncheon honoring Senator John Cornyn for his leadership in mental health and also in corrections reform. And in his remarks, he recalled a conversation he and I had had in early 2015 when he spoke to a meeting of the Bexar County Sheriff's Association. At the time, I asked him if he wanted to meet the person who was responsible for the largest mental health institution in the nation. And then I introduced him to Sheriff Jim McDonnell, the former Los Angeles County Sheriff. And in most every case, sheriffs across the country run the largest mental health facilities in their county, and that's the county jail. You know, in the 60s and 70s in the US, we warehoused the mentally ill in mental hospitals with awful treatments that can only be described as out of the dark ages. Electroshock and insulin treatments, prefrontal lobotomies, ice baths, and the like. And after several nationally public lawsuits, many were given bus tickets to their last known address, then just left to fend for themselves. So fast forward 50 years later, those mental institutions have now been replaced by jails and prisons. On average, 40 to 45% of those incarcerated in U.S. jails and prisons have some level of diagnosed mental illness. And a significant portion of those have been in and out of these institutions multiple times, often for low-level crimes and substance abuse. And as a result, our nation's jails and prisons have become de facto mental institutions. Texas, from a statewide perspective, is very near the bottom of the list nationally for what is budgeted for mental illness. There have been attempts, I know when Joe Strauss was the speaker, there were funds that were legislated and approved to increase bed space in our mental institutions here in Texas. But that's been just a little at a time, and it certainly doesn't meet the demand. However, several counties and cities in Texas have been ahead of the game in terms of diversion programs for the mentally ill. Many booked into jail who have mental illness and often co-occurring substance abuse don't always belong in jail, but that's where they end up. And many times, they just need mental health assistance. And the nation's jails, as I said, have become de facto mental health facilities where law enforcement is increasingly relied on to deal with individuals suffering with these issues. And that's not what jails were designed for. And it's frustrating to invest so much in providing mental health services to a large segment of people coming into our jails and then see the same person return repeatedly to jail. And these issues are especially prominent in major counties where the problems are exacerbated based on the size of the jurisdiction, the population, and the size of jails. And law enforcement officers see and deal with significant problems stemming from mental health issues during routine policing. Unfortunately, many counties are ill-equipped or untrained or hampered by law from adequately and appropriately treating individuals who arrive in jail suffering from mental illness. While some departments have facilities to temporarily hold individuals with mental health issues, they often don't have access to case histories or medical history of those individuals to respond to their respective situations beyond just temporary custody. And often individuals suffering from mental health disorders suffer from multiple problems with co-occurring substance abuse issues, such as failure to take prescribed medications or even self-medicating with illicit drugs. While serving as the Bexar County Sheriff, we housed just under 4,000 inmates, of which almost 900 had some level of diagnosed mental illness, from personality disorders, various disorders controlled by psychotropic drugs, to full-blown psychoses, where they are housed in the proverbial padded cell with a paper smock. During that time, approximately 22% of those booked into jail had a mental health history. And during that time, 2013 to 2016, approximately 22% of the inmates were treated for mental health issues and about 8% for serious mental health issues. More than $2.5 million was spent on psychotropic drugs annually, and that was 20% of all the medical costs. Today, in Texas, the mentally ill population in jails has grown to as high as 40%, especially in smaller counties without resources, resources that larger metropolitan areas have. In a similar way, the dollars spent on psychotropic drugs have also grown exponentially. Of those admitted to jail and diagnosed with mental illness, almost 60% have been arrested 5 or more times. And I know that a number of counties represented here today have been recognized nationally for your pioneering efforts to divert people with mental illness and substance abuse from local jails. Many counties have had success with various jail diversion programs through specialty courts, DWI courts, drug courts, veterans courts, and misdemeanor mental health courts. However, it takes collaboration of all the stakeholders, law enforcement, the courts, the district attorney, the regional mental health authority, and leaders at all levels. We couldn't have done what we did in Bexar County without that kind of help and collaboration. And misdemeanor mental health courts have produced promising results. There's a 17% recidivism rate for those participating in a mental health court, compared to 26% for the comparison group. And in the same way, drug courts have had similar successes. Graduates from felony drug courts generally only a 10% rearrest rate compared to 25% not in the program. For misdemeanor courts, data concludes a 13% rearrest rate compared to 20% for those not in a program. And veterans courts also have shown successes, an 8.7% rearrest rate compared to 14% for others. So whether it's for substance abuse or mental illness, law enforcement must be involved for these programs to be successful. And they're usually the first to interact with these individuals anyway. Crisis intervention training is essential for both officers on patrol and also working in detention. This will get your attention. The Bexar County Mental Health Unit trained for crisis intervention in 2009. At the time, they had to use physical force 50 times annually. From 2009 to 2016, only 8 times in 7 years. So units like this respond to calls from individuals in crisis in 26 municipalities in the unincorporated areas of Bexar County. And most were suicide attempts or homicidal thoughts. So a lot of counties have focused on crisis intervention training, post-adjudication programs, and reentry initiatives. However, there are more opportunities at the pretrial stage to screen every person who is arrested. So working closely with organizations such as the Meadows Foundation, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, they can help identify where efforts are needed to best target our efforts going forward. So the primary challenges remaining to tackle are identifying early those who are arrested and are mentally ill, developing appropriate protocols to get them out of jail and provide community-based services, and developing better collaboration between the justice system and mental health authorities to provide the right help for these individuals. Neither what we do now nor what we used to do in the 60s is acceptable. I know because my brother was in and out of those mental institutions in the mid-60s when he had a nervous breakdown in his 20s. Not till the mid-70s did our family know that he was manic depressive or bipolar, or that lithium could control the chemical imbalance in the brain. Fortunately, we're recognizing that jail isn't the place for those with mental illness, and that treatment and community services are often much better in returning individuals to a life of wellness. And there are numerous aspects to smart justice: pretrial diversion, therapeutic courts, enhanced training for law enforcement and others in the criminal justice system. Let me give you some context of why this is so critical for our communities throughout Texas and across our country. In the 60s and the 70s, there were approximately 600,000 mental health beds nationwide. 8 years ago, there were fewer than 34,000, but I doubt if there are many more. So across the U.S., 800,000 people with serious mental illnesses are booked into jails annually. Wouldn't it be better if we had mental health institutions that could take that load, that could do that work? And there's certainly other challenges in the corrections arena, and we could likely go on for another 2 hours. But let me briefly mention a couple more. Not only do inmates struggle with mental health challenges, so do police and corrections officers. Wellness programs have become essential to law enforcement professionals who deal with the trauma. I can tell you my 12 Deputy U.S. Marshals who responded to Uvalde, we've got terrific wellness programs as well as psychologists and social workers who have helped them through the crisis that they experienced when they went into that school building and made entry and took out the shooter. Fortunately, those of us in law enforcement are learning to share and talk about these traumatic situations that we experience. For too long, many of us just buried those feelings, and then that trauma shows up at the wrong times and must be addressed. In fact, I view someone who seeks help in these circumstances as having courage. At the beginning of my remarks, I said I wanted to speak to the role that we have in our communities. And our job isn't just about locking people up and throwing away the key, so to speak. We have the opportunity to provide programs that will help inmates re-enter society and become productive members of our community. Imagine what inmates are thinking when they're facing return to their community and to their families, with the very real fears when they think about getting out. Like, how am I going to reconnect with my family? And if they're parents, how am I ever going to reconnect with my children? And fears about employment, wondering, how am I ever going to be able to find a job after being here? Who's going to hire me? And how am I going to be able to make a fresh start? So reentry programs provide a lot of opportunities to answer these questions. Collaboration with other county offices can present reentry fairs and bring nonprofit organizations behind bars to provide information about services available to inmates once they're released. With events, past mistakes don't have to keep inmates down. And with events like these, they're given the tools to find housing, work, and an education. But more importantly, they're given hope. And here in Texas, and on a national level, to assist in reentry efforts, there's a concentration of faith and character-based programs within jails and state prison systems. While serving in Bexar County, we also partnered with outside groups such as Bill Glass Ministries. And this organization works by bringing in athletes and entertainers to inspire and motivate participants. After a 2-day Weekend of Champions event, more than 2,000 inmates at our facility prayed with volunteers and made professions of faith. We also noticed a distinct change in inmate attitudes towards staff as a result of the atmosphere that was created by this event. And we saw a substantial increase in the number of inmates who were enrolled in programs and classes offered by our jail program section. There are also programs to implement parent-child contact visitation for inmate mothers in a county jail setting. And similar programs for fathers have also been developed and introduced. So program goals include these tenets: maintaining and strengthening parent-child relationships during incarceration, and lessening the trauma of separation for children through contact visits. These programs also collaborate with community agencies to provide educational classes that equip incarcerated parents with effective parenting skills and link incarcerated parents with community resources upon release. My hope is that this short focus on leadership development, and various challenges in the corrections arena prompt you to think about how these can be addressed in your community and in your county and in your larger community. And I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, because it's been an honor for me to be with you today. I'm glad to take any questions you have, but I'll also stick around for a little while if you do have some one-on-one questions. But remember, I gave you fair warning that I expected questions. I tell when I have all hands meetings, I tell them unless there are 10 questions at the end of my remarks, no one gets to leave the office, but in this case, no one gets to visit the exhibits. Questions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No questions? Okay. Oh, okay. Yes, ma'am.
When it's facing capacity issues in the jail, which program have you seen, or which county have you seen with the most successful program with dealing with mental illness to get them released?
Okay, let me come down. Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay. So the question was, when we run into capacity issues, specifically with mental health, what kind of things have we done? Yeah. Well, I think in a lot of cases, we don't know if we are successful at the beginning, but whether we are later in terms of rearrest and those kinds of things. Now, I will tell you, in larger jails, we had areas in the jail where, I mean, literally, we had 40 cells that were padded cells. But we also had units where individuals who were taking their medications, where it wasn't as extreme as psychoses, for instance, they were in a pod where we could provide them the whole group training. The other thing that we did, whether it was for mental illness or for homelessness, In San Antonio, there's an organization called Haven for Hope, and its intent is to provide a transition for individuals that are homeless and to help them get homes again, but also they deal with mental illness, with substance abuse and those kinds of things. Prospect Courtyard is open to anybody, regardless. It's a safe place that they can be. But if they want to take advantage of the transition programs, then they need to make that decision. And that's where we were successful. Especially if they were homeless, we had programs that addressed substance abuse, mental health, and what we found, and those classes were taught by individuals from Haven for Hope. And you and your communities may have something similar. And then when they got out of jail, they didn't just look at the lights of San Antonio and go there. They'd already established a relationship with Haven for Hope, and then they transitioned there where they had housing and could continue that route to being productive citizens. So that's what we found is partnering with community organizations that could also help. Let's see, what was the name? There's another organization, and they initially they provided housing, but it wasn't a halfway house as such. But generally, they helped us with individuals that had mental illness, and it provided apartments for them so that while they were when they were released from jail, they had housing, and it was somebody who could make sure that they took their medications. Because so often, 5 days after someone leaves jail, they quit taking their medications because they can't get another prescription. But by putting them in housing, then someone could check on them to make sure that they're getting their medications. Yeah, good question. Any other? Yes, sir.
You kind of answered it a little bit, but I work with Marshals contract with us down south, and now I'm county inmates. I see a lot more inmates that are being released, so we'll get somebody in as a youth worker, and we'll try to train them like food service and try to get them some of those certifications. But when they're gone within 2 or 3 days, and I guess I've heard you talking about maybe we ought to be working with communities. Let's start finding something out there where people can continue to go out there.
Right. I mean, that's a great point. And I think, and I'll tell you, and I've used his name a few times, but when I became the sheriff, there were fewer than 20 courses that were available for inmates. You know, and that was, whether it was, working on substance abuse or that kind of thing. When I left office, Raul Benasco, his jail programs area, we had over 135 different classes that they could go to. And they were things to develop skills where when they left jail, they could transition, and we had employers who would hire them. And that's, and what are the needs in your community? What kinds of jobs? We certified people through OSHA so that they could then go on to the right kind of jobs. Yeah. Thank you. Any more? Okay, we got 8 more questions to go. Well, I've really enjoyed being here, and it's good to get back with lots of friends because you know, when you're a Fed, but I will tell you that I wouldn't be in this job today had I not had that experience as the sheriff of Bexar County. And, you know, there's so many people across Texas, across our country, who absolutely have no idea about the great work that all of you do and the challenges that there are in the work that you do. So thank you every day for what you do and what you do to contribute to your community. Thanks so much. God bless you.